I've been thinking a lot about the word quiet quitting because it's coming up so much right now. And I think a couple things have come up for me about the term quiet quitting. One is there's actually a term that Gallup has been using for many, many, many years uh, for quiet quitting, which is just simply disengaged at work. Quiet quitting, my understanding of it means people are doing the minimal amounts that they need to keep their job, but nothing more. So they're not getting any excess work. And Gallup's been measuring that at companies for, as long as I've been doing this and probably much longer than that. So it's just disengaged. And there's another term called actively disengaged, which means you're sabotaging your company in some way, or you're complaining a lot about it and creating a lot of negativity. So, it is interesting how there's always a new term for an old problem. And I think quiet quitting in some ways is that. And it's just the fact that a lot of people are disengaged at work. It's always been a majority are disengaged, and engagement is, according to Gallup, consistently lower than disengagement in most companies, at least in the United States, and I think across the world. So what's that? What's going on? And I think it's a really good question to ask. I think hopefully the term quiet quitting has more people who are leading companies asking that question. Why would people do that? Because for some it seems inconceivable. And I think it's funny to think that it's inconceivable. I think it's pretty easy to imagine why people are quiet quitting. They don't love their jobs. And a lot of times because the environments they work in don't necessarily prioritize them loving their jobs as much as them doing their jobs. So I was in this exhibit here in Austin, and it was the Sistine Chapel. They took high resolution photographs and put it on a ceiling as out by the Formula One racetrack, which is a very funny place to go see the Sistine Chapel photographs. But you go to the Formula One racetrack, there's all these cars racing around, and then you go into a little building, and there's the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's art up on the ceiling. And so you go in there and you look at this is one of the most, the greatest legacies of Renaissance art that there is. It's kind of what you think of when you think of that Renaissance art, or the classical art. And you go in to this room and you look up, and unlike at the Sistine Chapel, it's actually very close. You can see the paintings up close. And what I learned there was that Michelangelo was not painting those paintings by himself. He actually had a team, and they worked for 4 years on just the ceiling. 4 years on the ceiling. So in a lot of ways, he was kind of the CEO of the Sistine Chapel painting project, and he had a whole team that was supporting him, which we don't really hear about. But so somehow they were able to maintain a team of people for 4 years painting something on the ceiling of the Vatican with all the money they needed. And I think a lot of that is because that is the kind of work that is the most inspired work you can get. Those people are that is fully inspired. There is an inspiration around that kind of work that's gonna lead that project. The church who is funding it, they're gonna put as much money as they need to make sure that's great. And the artists themselves are gonna make sure that they do it because this is their genius, their masterpiece. Now, businesses are not painting the Sistine Chapel, and I'm not trying to say that they should be, but from a scale of zero inspiration to Sistine Chapel, the more that you can get close to that Sistine Chapel level of inspiration, the more likely you're not going to have people quietly quitting. When someone is inspired or passionate, they're going to be doing their best work. And the thing is, every human being has that ability to be inspired. It's just not necessarily painting the Sistine Chapel. Sometimes it's working with numbers. Sometimes it's working with people. Sometimes it's just inspired by selling. Sometimes it's inspired by creating a process or procedure. People really do get fired up about what they do. And everyone that I've ever worked with, everyone on some level has a reason they got into the work that they do, which we call the fundamental why. Why do they do what they do? And a finance person, a chief financial officer, they were probably really good at math when they were in first grade. And a marketing person, they probably did a lot of drawing, or they loved getting ideas out there when they were in kindergarten. This isn't something that just happens when you're an adult. A lot of people actually have something that's been inspiring them since they were a kid. It's an intrinsically motivating action, and it's why we get into the jobs that we do. Usually it relates to what we feel excited about and feel passionate about. So, when you talk about quiet quitting or disengagement or actively disengaged, what's going on is you're closer to zero than Sistine Chapel in terms of somebody's inspiration. Dan Pink uses the term in his book Drive, intrinsically motivated. they're intrinsically motivated, they're gonna go above and beyond just because it feels good, because that's what is motivating them. And so when you got quiet quitting going on, you probably have a question of that level of inspiration. It's a question of meaning and purpose. And I think that there's a lot that a leader of a company can do. I'm not trying to paint this as travel, but I think to at least get a little bit more of that, and to be focusing on that, and to really asking the question, well, what do we need to do to get not just more perks and incentives? That's not going to necessarily increase intrinsic motivation. That's extrinsic motivation. How do you get more of that intrinsic motivation coming alive across your organization? And those who have it will show up for you.